Hi, everybody. We're here today with Jackie Katzis. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Perfect. Yes.
Or Jacqueline, I found. Is that your full name?
Yeah, Jacqueline, but I don't ever really go by Jacqueline.
Cool. So
Jackie.
Jackie is here right now. She is an English teacher originally from Chicago, Illinois, but you have lived around the world. You speak multiple languages. I want to get to know you, and I want to get to know where you're from, which is an area I'm not too familiar with, if I'm going to be honest.
That's okay.
Yeah. So how are you doing today?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. I'm actually impressed that we're on the same time zone because I was thinking that for you it would be super early in the morning. But
Nope. I'm now in North Carolina on the East Coast, and you are in Florida at the moment, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I am curious to know a little bit about your background. Do you mind telling me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So, I was born, I say Chicago, but it was Chicago suburbs.
Okay.
And so one thing that's different, I spent a lot of time in Brazil, and I know your husband is also Brazilian. The suburbs in Brazil are very different than the suburbs in the States. So typically, like in Sao Paulo or Rio, the suburbs, or like the periphery, I guess would be the translation. Those are maybe not the most expensive areas to live. They're not the most desirable areas to live. And actually in the US, it's the opposite. So when you grow up in the suburbs, it's typically very family friendly, has really good schools, safer than the big cities.
Right.
So there's just that little difference there. But I
Yeah,
grew
I
up in
love
the
that.
west suburbs of Chicago. And then, I had a pretty, I guess, normal upbringing. And then I went to school at the University of Iowa. And then I did my master's in Chicago, downtown Chicago. And then I worked there for a while. And then I had a bit of a existential crisis and went to Brazil.
Oh, I'm curious to hear about that.
Yes.
How did that? So you had an existential crisis. Was it too cold? What caused you to go to Brazil? Because those are very different places.
I know. And it's one of those things that it's like, who knows why we end up on the path that we end up. But I do think it's really interesting when we do look back and we see like all the little signs that were there all along. So to backtrack a little bit. So I studied Spanish at the University of Iowa. I studied abroad in Spain for a semester. And when I graduated, I started working as a Spanish teacher. And I really liked learning Spanish and that whole process, but I didn't exactly love teaching Spanish. And I think a lot of it is because I was insecure about it not being my native language. So I relate a lot to other English teachers that are teaching English, and they also have those insecurities because they feel like, oh, my pronunciation is a little bit different, or I have an accent, or, there's a lot of things.
Foreign teachers of English then, like Brazilians teaching English or like French people teaching English. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And what's so funny is on the weekends when I was working as a Spanish teacher, but on the weekends I would volunteer as an ESL teacher it was called Erie Neighborhood House. It was just like, I don't know, it's just like a little community center in a Hispanic neighborhood of Chicago. And I would go there on Saturdays and I would help people for free as a volunteer. I would help them learn English. And I loved this. Like I gave up my weekends to do this, but for whatever reason, it never crossed my mind to do that as a job. I don't know why.
I find that it's very uncommon to meet outside of the internet, outside of YouTube, just native English speakers teaching ESL. Like it's just weird. It's just not something that comes up in conversation. So I see what you mean.
Yeah. And I do think that's something for us to just be more aware of. Like, what am I doing for free that I really love? Or what am I doing for fun? And maybe just think about that career path. But instead, I was like, no, I'm going to do school counseling. That'll be the next step. And I got my master's in school counseling. And then I worked for Chicago Public Schools for a while, first as a Spanish teacher, then as a school counselor. And I think that's when the quote unquote existential crisis hit me. It was, I had done all those steps. You graduate high school, you go to college, you get your degree, you get a job, you get your master's degree, you get a better job. And I still felt like this is not what I want to be doing for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I was the youngest person in my department at the school that I was working at by far. I mean, there was a few people that were maybe a little bit older than me, but then a lot of people who were quite a bit older than me.
Right.
And it kind of gave me a glimpse of my future. And
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And to be honest, it wasn't like, oh, this is horrible, but it just wasn't really what I wanted for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I also found myself like wishing away the time, like counting down the days to the weekend, counting down the months until my next break, counting down the years until my retirement. And I was in my 20s to retire. And I'm like, I don't want to be wishing away my life. You know?
Well,
like
it sounds like you have a bit of the entrepreneurial spirit in you. I mean, for someone to go from that sort of job into going on YouTube, putting yourself out there in the world, sounds like the existential crisis made sense.
It did. It made sense. It didn't feel like it made sense at the time.
Yeah.
It was kind of one of those things like, what's wrong with you? Like, you've got the best job and you're living in this great city and the checklist is all checked off, but you can just feel like inside that I just felt this pull. Like I really wanted to spend more time, especially in South America, which I didn't really know much about South America. And so I just decided to take like a year. It's like, no, I'm going to take a year off. And this was before I had children or I wasn't in a serious relationship. So I decided now is the time to go and be risky, because the only person I'm putting at risk is myself. Like,
for me, at least, the only regrets I have are things that I don't do. If I do something, then it's like that was a choice in that moment. And this is what I get from it, you know? But I feel like those regrets that you have from not doing something are the ones that really hang over your head. That you'll carry on for years on end, and you just got to do it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I have this visual of myself as like this 80, 90-year-old lady looking back on my life being like, what would you regret more? You know, staying where it's safe and comfortable, even though you feel like something's not right, or just throwing yourself out there a little bit and living life, taking some risks. And it was so clear to me, like, just take the risk, see what happens.
So you spent then 10 years in Brazil after that?
So I didn't plan.
I saw, you have, I think what was the website? It was like Stardom, like famous people, something.com. And it's like Jacqueline Katz's.
So funny.
And it says like, you met your husband 2 weeks after moving there?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Oh, this is all like on a website?
Yeah. I found
crazy.
it. You are on the internet, girl.
I know I'm on the internet. Some of the stuff I find is pretty interesting. Like I see stuff like net worth and I'm like, ooh, what is this gonna say? I'm like, where are they getting this information from?
Right. Like, as long as they don't know like where you live, right? Because that could be
well, I'm sure that
concern.
Information is out there too. It's hard nowadays to be anonymous, but yeah, I definitely do not consider myself a famous person at all. So it is funny. It's comical to see this stuff on the internet, because I'm like, it's almost like a different person. I don't even know.
You're funny. You're very accomplished.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
But I went to Brazil basically because my friend who decided to come with me, she really wanted to go to Brazil. So for me, I spoke Spanish, so I thought it would make more sense to go someplace where I could actually communicate. But she said, no, let's start in Brazil. And we actually traveled to Brazil for about a week for Carnival the year before we moved.
Yeah. As like a test run.
I was like, let's test it out, see what we think. And I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And it's so funny for me to like look back and remember that time when I came as like the total gringa, not understanding anything. just soaking it all in, with those like fresh eyes. And I met so many amazing people. And then after that trip, my friend and I decided that we wanted to take maybe a year off, 6 months to a year. So that's when I left my job and we kind of went on a one-way ticket. And we were open. We thought we would start in Brazil and then go all over South America, just see what happens. But we ended up staying. I met my husband 2 weeks after I landed. And I started working as an English teacher, which I loved so much. I remember thinking, oh, I cannot believe I'm like being paid. And I was not being paid much at all. Very little.
About but the experience.
It was just so great, like working with adults and people that really wanted to learn and were so interested in the culture. And I felt like I was actually learning even more from them. Just, I would correct their English and help them, but just learning about the culture and their work and just the everyday lives.
It's a real connection there.
Yes.
As you probably know, my husband is Brazilian. I was his English teacher. And I always tell people, I'm like, if you're looking for a partner, consider looking for a language teacher because you get on such a deep level very fast,
Yeah.
Like I want to practice the third conditional. Let's like talk about regrets in your life. And like, you dive so deep.
Yes.
That
it's like therapy.
It's just, exactly.
It really
is. So you're originally from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
What is the term? Are you a Chicagoan or
Chicagoan?
Chicagoan. And Illinois, I have no idea. Would you be an
Illinoisan? Honestly, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say I'm an Illinoisan. I just say I'm from Illinois. But it's interesting because Illinois outside of Chicago is very rural. So, I mean, I guess there are a couple. I mean, it's suburbs and maybe there's a couple cities, but even so, they're more like agricultural cities.
Gotcha.
Or just small towns, lots of cornfields.
So do you feel like growing up, and I'm not sure how the Midwest plays into this, like Midwest culture and stuff, but do you feel like your upbringing there has impacted just who you are and like your relationship with, Brazilians and your husband? Do you see a lot of differences between you and him, for example?
Yes. Yeah. So I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and there's a lot of advantages to that because you're very close to the city. So all of our field trips, we would go to the museums downtown. Our prom, like the high school prom, we did like a little boat, like a cruise on Lake Michigan. And so there was a lot of really cool things just because we were so close to the city. You can take advantage of all the arts and museums and the sporting events, like all that stuff is right there. So you get like a good taste of big city life with a little bit of separation. So you're still in like your suburban bubble of like safety and everyone's kind of the same. But my dad and my mom, when I was, I think like 6 or 7 years old, they bought a farm out in like more like western part of Illinois.
Wow.
So on the weekends, we would also go out to the farm a lot. So they had like a horse farm with all different kinds of animals and things like that. And I started riding horses and spending a lot of time on the farm when I was in like second grade. And that became a huge part of my life all the way through up until about high school. And then in high school, you're just with your friends and that's it.
Right.
So I had this like mix of city farm growing up, which is kind of unique. I guess I consider myself a little bit of a chameleon in some ways that I can easily adapt to a lot of different environments. And it could have been because of my upbringing, but I also think it's just part of who I am because I'm the only one. I'm the oldest of 4. And we're like 4 kids in 5 years. So we're very close in age, but I'm the only one that had any interest in learning another language or studying abroad or even leaving Chicago. So I don't know. There's things that we're just kind of born with that we can't explain.
So like the area around your farm, looking online, I see that there's a lot of soy production. There's a lot of it's just big agricultural communities in the Midwest up there. Do you